Go. Noch nicht? Es wird der Trailer gespielt? Der ist schon gespielt.
So, Lat Dive and welcome to our panel discussion, Intersectionality in Film and TV, at Acadikia Festival of Romani Film this Sunday in Berlin. My name is Şeyda Kurt and I will be the moderator for tonight's discussion. I'm very happy that despite everything we can be here tonight in SO36 in the heart of Kreuzberg. And I'm looking forward to my guests, whom I will introduce in a few moments. But I'm also particularly happy about the viewers, about you on Facebook and YouTube who follow our discussion from home. And I would be all the more pleased if you took part in our discussion. You can ask questions in the comment columns, and I will ask these questions as soon as the opportunity arises or at the end of our discussion. Only constructive questions, of course. So now it is my pleasure to introduce my guests. I will start with, on the right, I welcome Lisa Smith. She's one of this year's jury members of the festival. Lisa Smith is chair of the ACRT, the Advisory Council for the Education of Romani and Other Travelers, and currently an editor at Travelers Times. Lisa is also a creative producer and has worked on a number of drama and documentary-based shorts, for example, for the BBC. She's the founder of It's Kashti Turaka, is it right? What does that mean?
So it's Kashti Turaka means it's good to talk in English Romani.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, I'll learn more and more tonight. And yeah, Kashti Turaka is an education and filmmaking project exploring the impact of anti-Gypsyism on youth mental health through a series of films co-produced with and from the perspectives of young Roma and travelers. Lisa, we are very happy to have you here. Hello.
Thank you.
So, then next to me on the right, I'm excited to introduce Maissa Lihedheb. She's a major in media and entertainment management. She wrote her dissertation about symbolic annihilation in mass media and its effect on the identity of first-generation immigrants. Maissa runs the classic Minority Presents film series in which she screens films that are mainly directed by women and queers of color and or focus on their realities. And she's the co-founder of the BIPOC, Black Indigenous People of Color Film Society. Welcome, Maissa.
Thank you for having me.
And my next guest here on my left is Raquel Kishori Dukpa. She's a writer, casting director, and producer who worked on the movie FUTUR DREI in all of these roles. FUTUR DREI, directed by Faraz Shariat, is a coming-of-age film. Dealing with experiences of refugees, experiences of being queer and racism in a post-migrant society. Raquel Kishori Dukpa is the publisher and editor of, here I show it, of this magazine, I See You, which was released after the film premiere and which deepens substantial topics and questions referring to the film. Raquel is part of the collective Jünglinge Film, and I'm very happy to welcome you as part of our discussion, Raquel.
Thank you.
And last but not least, I would like to introduce Dr. Emilia Roig, who unfortunately cannot be here today for private reasons. She's the founder and executive director of the Center for Intersectional Justice in Berlin. So she taught and did research on international and European law, critical race theory, and intersectionality in Chicago, Germany, and France. But I'm very grateful that she has not left us alone today. Dr. Emilia Roig recorded a short video introduction to the subject of intersectionality for us. It outlines the important questions of our discussion today. What is intersectionality? Why is it important to look at structures of discrimination in an intersectional way? And what does that have to do with film and television? We will see this video now. It has a length of 7 minutes. It's in German with English subtitles. And then after I've talked so much, it's your turn. I'm very happy and excited about hearing the experiences and opinions of Lisa Smith, Maissa Lihedheb, and Raquel Kishori Dukpa. But now let's start the video and enjoy.
Hallo, ich freue mich sehr, heute hier zu sein, auch wenn es nur mit Video klappt und leider auch nicht in Person, aber wenigstens kann ich die Perspektive ein bisschen erläutern. Deswegen freue ich mich für die Gelegenheit. Intersektionalität ist ein Begriff, der sich die Macht, die Privilegien und auch die sozialen Hierarchien widmet. Das heißt, dass natürlich ist es wichtig zu betrachten, dass wir unterschiedliche Identitätsmerkmale haben, die verschränkt wirken. Aber noch wichtiger ist es zu verstehen, dass unsere Identitäten erzeugt werden und produziert werden von sogenannten Unterdrückungssystemen. Und diese Systeme sind das Patriarchat, also der Kapitalismus und Rassismus/Kolonialismus. Das heißt, dass ich werde nicht als Frau, als schwarze Frau, als queere Frau geboren, sondern ich werde das gemacht von diesen Systemen. Und das ist auch das Gleiche für alle anderen Merkmale, die in unserer Gesellschaft marginalisiert werden. Das heißt, nicht-binäre Menschen, Transmenschen, Menschen mit Behinderung. Und das heißt auch, dass um diese Form der Diskriminierung und die Marginalisierung, die Ungleichheiten, die Ausschlüsse, die minorisierten Gruppen betreffen, entgegenzuwirken, ist es wichtig, in erster Linie diese Systeme sichtbar zu machen und die Macht, die damit einhergeht. Ein anderer wichtiger Aspekt von Intersektionalität ist die Hierarchie, in der unsere Differenzen eingebettet werden. Das heißt, dass das geht nicht darum zu sagen, dass wir alle vielfältig sind und mehrere Identitätsmerkmale, die nebeneinander sich entfalten, weil das entspricht nicht der Realität und das wäre ein bisschen so eine Whitewashing und auch Depolitisierung von Intersektionalität, wie das der Fall mit dem Diversitätsdiskurs ist. Ne? Wenn wir über Diversität sprechen, heißt es, ja, wir sind so ein Haufen von Menschen, die alle unterschiedlich sind und unsere Differenzen sollen angenommen werden. Aber bei Intersektionalität geht es darum zu verstehen, dass diese Differenzen in einer Hierarchie eingebettet sind. Das heißt, wir reden nicht über Andersartigkeit, sondern wir sprechen über Minderwertigkeit. Das heißt, die Tatsache, dass dass schwarze Menschen, dass Frauen, dass nicht-binären und Transmenschen diskriminiert werden, ist nicht, weil sie anders sind, sondern weil sie als minderwertig produziert werden, dargestellt werden und konstruiert wurden. Und das wurde durch unterschiedlichen Prozessen gemacht. Also ein Prozess ist Kolonialisation. Das heißt, dass in der Kolonialzeit um eben die Ausbeutung, um die Versklavung, den Mord an indigenen Menschen und an schwarzen Menschen zu rechtfertigen, müssten sie als minderwertig konstruiert werden. Na, und das heißt, dass die Norm, die überlegene Norm ist eben weiß sein. Und deswegen, also jetzt, wenn wir das auch an der Roma- und Sinti-Community betrachten, das heißt, dass Roma- und Sinti-Menschen wurden auch als minderwertig betrachtet und rassifiziert in diesem Sinne. Deswegen schwarze Menschen, Roma und Sinti, Muslime Menschen in dem europäischen Kontext werden nicht nur als anders gesehen, sondern als minderwertig. Und wenn wir das erstmal verstehen, können wir diese Hierarchie aufbrechen, anstatt uns nur auf die Differenzen zu konzentrieren. Ein anderer wichtiger Komponent von Unterdrückung und von intersektionalen Unterdrückung ist eben die Repräsentation. Und in diesem Sinne ist Film ein sehr, sehr, sehr wichtiger, also die Filmindustrie spielt eine extrem wichtige Rolle, um diese Klischees, die Stereotypen und die Minderwertigkeit von bestimmten Gruppen zu perpetuieren, zu perpetuieren und auch weiter zu konstruieren, immer wieder. Und es gibt Zum Beispiel in den Repräsentationen von schwarzen Menschen, die als besonders gefährlich gelten oder besonders unintelligent oder besonders animalisch auch wirken. Also das wurde auch von vielen Filmen gemacht und diese Bilder prägen uns auch seit der Kindheit. Das ist auch das Gleiche mit der Repräsentation als Roma- und Sinti-Menschen, als unehrlich oder als auch gefährlich, als minderwertig, als Pathologie, also die Pathologisierung auch von Roma- und Sinti-Menschen wurde auch durch Film wirklich sehr, sehr viel gemacht. Also die Repräsentation und auch die Romantisierung und die Objektifisierung von genau, alle Minderheiten und auch Roma- und Sinti-Menschen. Deswegen, ich will jetzt gar nicht so viel länger sprechen, aber nur sagen, dass mit dieser Macht, die die Filmindustrie inne hat, das heißt die Macht, eben die Welt zu prägen in einer Art und Weise, dass es unsere Wahrnehmung, unsere Bilder definiert, kommt auch eine Verantwortung. Und wenn die Filmindustrie diese Verantwortung erstmal übernimmt, dann kann es sehr, sehr, sehr viel bewirken und diese Klischees entgegenwirken, dekonstruieren und auch ein Recht auch auf vielfältige Repräsentation. Das heißt, dass es nicht nur ein Bild von einer bestimmten Gruppe entspricht, sondern wirklich, dass es die Möglichkeit gibt, eben Roma-Menschen als alles zu betrachten, dass es da überhaupt keine Einschränkungen gibt. Deswegen, ich wünsche euch und Ihnen eine sehr interessante und konstruktive Konferenz und wünschte, ich könnte dabei sein, bin aber auch im Herzen da. Vielen, vielen Dank.
So, thank you so much again, Dr. Emilia Roig. Best wishes from the SO36. So, to sum up, discrimination happens on the basis of different factors or intersections of race, gender, class, ableism, anti-Semitism, anti-Gypsyism, heterosexism, transphobia, xenophobia, and much more. And it happens in a system of hierarchies. That's very important, like Dr. Emilia Roig underlined. And it happens at the same time. And intersectionality helps us to, provides us a frame to see these intersections, to understand them, to order them, and to address it. And now, of course, I would like to know from my guests here, what role does intersectionality play in their work as filmmakers? And I want to start with you, Maissa. Why do we need, for example, a BIPOC film society in Germany? What led you to start this project?
So the reason why we started BIPOC Film Society was mainly because me and my co-founder, Shima, we didn't feel like there was a space for us where we could explore films and find other filmmakers of color and queer filmmakers, because usually all these film networking groups were mainly white, and it was not a place where we really felt comfortable. It was also very male-dominated, and that's why we thought we should start this and start a community where we can all like help each other out, because access is so difficult that I feel like we can only give like opportunities to each other now. And I think this is so, like, networking within our communities is so important right now. And this is really what I realized with BIPOC Film Society also, and working, for instance, with Jünglinge too. And I think this is the year of like all these groups coming together and helping each other out grow, because no one else is going to do it for us. Yeah, and that's the reason.
Wow. And also like one second. This Classic Minority Presents film series, I think it maybe a similar experience led you to start this project, like with this focus on women and queers of color.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. That's what I started 2 years ago. But it wasn't really a collective. It was more like a series I did where I invited female identifying filmmakers of color and wanted to shine light, especially on movies from the MENA region. And yeah, so it's quite similar to BIPOC Film Society, except now it's like an actual collective with people and
Mm-hmm. Cool, that's very interesting. We'll talk about this kind of collectives and forms of resistance in a form later. And it's great that we can make maybe a transnational comparison thanks to Lisa. How, like, you're living in England, you're working in England usually. What are your experiences similar to Maissa's? Like, what challenges do you face as a filmmaker and educator, of course?
Yeah, so I think it might be useful just to give an overview of the representation of Romani women in film and TV in the UK context through my own lens as a Romani woman. So the presence of Romani women in cinema is as old as cinema itself, with the earliest projections of us on screen in 1987 in Britain. So our presence is not something that's new. But through the ages in film and TV and art and literature, not just in UK context, but I suppose European society, is that we've been used as characters to create elements of mystery, be objects of desire, have mystical powers, or be portrayed as having a habit of criminality or adding little to the societies that we live in, overall, I suppose. And there's no doubt for me in my mind when I'm filmmaking, and I have in the back of my mind that the creation of film and TV is a political undertaking, no doubt, in that it represents, produces and reproduces power relations because it determines who gets to represent who. And this is an issue that I'm really considering and thinking about when I'm making film. And I guess more in a UK context is I feel like these narrow depictions of what it means to be a Romani woman and Romani womanhood means that even when we are visible on screen, the range of contributions that we have and bring to society are missing, and our intersectional identities as human beings are kind of erased, I would say. So I suppose relating it back to the UK context and how Romani women are perceived, I think there was a programme 10 years on now, but My Big Fat Gypsy Wedding, and this really dominates the narrative in mainstream society on what it means to be a Romani or traveller woman. So much so that having conversations with young Romani and traveller women about this, it really leads you to, like a lot of people I've spoken to, it really leads them to question their own identity, because there is this, you know, the woman is the homemaker, she is a wife, she's uneducated, and this is the stereotype that's pushed on to young girls, and they internalize this. And this has really severe consequences for members of our LGBT community as well, because of these narrow depictions of what it's meant to be a Romani woman, and this stereotype that's projected into the world. I feel like film and TV really has the power to influence belief systems and attitudes of wider society. But of course, it also impacts on how we view ourselves and feel about ourselves as people from marginalised communities. And I think this is an issue. And I guess before I stop with film and TV, I think the issue with popular culture and depictions of marginalised communities in this is that it erases our experiences as multidimensional human beings, and how we're portrayed in film and TV ultimately then impacts on how society views, values and treats us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We will deepen, of course, these experiences and also the question how we should deal with them. But now, of course, I'm also curious about Raquel's assessment. And I sent a little SOS to our team for because my computer is kind of, slept away. So, okay, you check this. Great. So, Raquel. Here, I already mentioned this magazine you published for the film FUTUR DREI, and I think in the editorial it says, we move because we have to keep talking, because the cultural scene needs discourses about racism, sexism, queerphobia and other forms of discrimination. Where exactly and maybe why are these conversations missing, in your opinion? This is my first question. And my second question would be, in what form does, for example, a film like FUTUR DREI intervene or, does things better?
When we started working on our film FUTUR DREI, we talked a lot about the fact that in our youth we were all longing for films that present queer and post-migrant identities not as opposites, because we really had the feeling that in our contemporary German cinema, being queer or being post-migrant is always portrayed as something that can't be combined in one identity. So we wanted to change this with FUTUR DREI, and yeah, I think because you were asking where these conversations are missing, I have the feeling that very often these conversations are held amongst actors and actresses, but rarely within broadcasting stations and especially within production contexts. And for me, like talking from the perspective being a casting director, it is often enough for production companies when they have a so-called diverse cast and they say, okay, now we can present that we're like such a diverse production. But I would like to see more conversations about the intersectionality within discrimination within production context, and also what it means to invite other perspectives than the normative one, and that we work on like building structures that are anti-racist and queer-friendly, so on. And I think that requires different power structures and also a different sensibility within our production work.
Cool. So, I mean, we're talking about artistic work here, but we also talk about the intersections of racism, sexism, anti-Gypsyism, queerphobia, and like about structures of power, hierarchies, and so on. Also about resistance strategies and new narratives that refer to these structures. Does that mean, or would you say, question to you all three, that you understand your art or your artistic actions as political? Would you describe yourself as a political artist? So, what's the story?
I think, for me personally, I feel like our whole existence is political just by being of color and being an artist. And I also feel like, even if I even wouldn't want to be, I think that we always get pushed in that direction anyways, that like they usually want to see they want us to make, for instance, films about diversity. It feels like, especially with fundings right now, that they're really like trying to fund stories that are about being brown, black, queer, instead of just like me telling a story about like a fish in the ocean, for instance. I feel like automatically we are pushed in that direction, and I think media and film and TV is, in my opinion, even more political than politics sometimes, because it has this power to shape views of people. I don't want to talk too much.
Yeah. So what do you want?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I can't really distance myself from that. I think the political aspect invades every single aspect of our life. So for me, they're really both combined into one. Yeah.
And so, I mean, we can state that intersectionality is also about identity and about politics, and maybe about identity politics, because it also describes the system of oppression, the oppression of marginalized groups because of chosen or ascribed identities and attributes which are associated with these images of identities by the white, cis, male, hetero-dominated society. And I don't know, maybe you know this discussion which always comes around about art and artistic work. Like, if we encounter film from this intersectional perspective, or the perspective of identity politics, does that mean that everyone can only make art according to their identities? Maybe, you know which discussions I mean. It's like always like, okay, like me as a, I don't know, woman of color, and that's kind of that what you already mentioned. Yeah, Maissa.
I think the basic problem is that white male authors always think that their gaze is a universal one and their view on stories is a universal one. And I think it really, for me, it really helps to do films that are coming from my point of view and make my point of view like visible. And I don't know, if you want to make films about other perspectives, you can't do this with not inviting them to work with you as authors, directors, and so on. And I think, yeah, otherwise it's the same what like white authors do, that they always think, okay, I can tell every story because my gaze isn't shaped by my like perspective in the society.
Yeah, and I even feel like that sometimes even like producers or like even film schools, they kind of feel like that your view is too narrow because you would only talk from your perspective. Like I've heard so many people that were rejected as a scriptwriter from film schools in Berlin, where they would say, well, we think that maybe you're too narrow in your story, so it would only be your perspective, and maybe you need to learn how to have perspectives for like the majority kind of. And I was like, but I mean, isn't that like everyone's view anyways? And that's already a thing where I'm like, okay, yeah, that's, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand that very well. You want to, or I jump to the next question?
Yeah, I mean, I think if work's made in collaboration and consultation with the community that it's representing, then I think it can happen. But in the context, I suppose, of Romani and Traveller film, we have a lot of the borrowing, and I guess that's across all groups. We have the borrowing of people's stories without actually including them in the creative process. And then that creates imagery and film from the more dominant, wider perspective opposed to that internal, authentic experience. So what we see then is this perpetuation of cliches and false narratives that aren't from the people themselves. So I think people can create film if they're not personally from that same community. However, it needs to be in close collaboration and consultation to make sure that the authentic voice actually shines through.
Yeah, but what I realize a lot is like, people don't want to give away their spot as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like they don't want to actually hire writers of color or like writers that could talk about these stories because they think they just enough research is enough. And I've encountered that a lot as well, where it's just like, I mean, we're doing enough research to be very inclusive, but it's like you will never really be able to tell a story that authentically as someone who has experienced these stories, especially because it's lacking. So why not give that space?
Yeah, and I think you touch on a really important point because it takes away from people from those communities as well in the creative industries. You know, there's plenty of directors, script writers, producers from the communities that these production companies seek to represent. So I absolutely agree.
And I think it's also a question of who is profiting from it in an economical way, because when you borrow people's stories and you do all the research, like nobody gets the credit for it. And after all, it's just like the same names, under the script.
Yeah. I just have an example as well, because once I went to a panel talk of showrunners of 4 different TV shows that are running in Germany, quite successful, and as well. And but one show was specifically about like the Arab mafia in Berlin. So I asked them, wouldn't it be more authentic to hire also authors of color, like especially people with Arab background? And what he replied to me was like, well, you know, I think like. I loved watching The Terminator, and the author didn't have to be a robot to tell the story. And I was like, and it was still authentic. And it's, again, like acting like we are science fiction characters, like we exist, and just give away your spot. That's, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very curious about this question because it's also important for me as a journalist. Like, I think that my work wouldn't work in a way if I would just only maybe represent the stories from the communities or from the, I don't know, from the perspectives I'm coming from. So I always ask myself, okay, how do I reach kind of perspective or a gaze, for example, when I'm writing about refugees or the struggles of refugees. And I think sometimes, is it a better option that I don't do it, I don't write about it? Or, like, of course, I could say, okay, I'll collaborate with a person who has this experiences. But I think sometimes I ask myself, isn't it impossible, or is it possible at all to write or to represent structures you haven't experienced yourself? So I know that FUTUR DREI, for example, which is also dealing with the experiences of refugees, I know that you collaborated with people from a Geflüchtetenheim. I don't know now the English word for it. Can you tell us kind of about the collaboration or how it worked?
At the beginning of our process, Faraz and I talked a lot about the representation of people who fled from Iran, because that's not an experience we share. And we started actually with Faraz's parents and talked to them a lot how they would like to be portrayed in the film, because they played themselves actually in the film. And after that, actually, I was working in a refugee shelter this time, because my mom was also working there. And then we met a lot of people and tried to, when we wrote the film, to collaborate with them, like having readings about the scenes and so on. But I think this is also, to be honest, something that I would criticize now, like looking on our film, because there were a lot of people working with us within the sound recording or our music supervisor was also a person from Iran, but they were not in the positions that they were really like directing the film. And so I think we really wanted to make clear that this film comes from a second generation perspective. And I think for us it was important to not make our perspective invisible. And when we first edited the film, there was a little like letter at the beginning of the film. Okay, this is our perspective as second generation migrant kids. But actually then we left it before Berlinale, because they said, okay, you see it anyways when you see the film.
You're on the red carpet.
It starts with an image of Faraz being portrayed by his dad with the VHS camera and so on. And I hope that it's visible that we made this film from our perspective. But to be honest, I think that's also something maybe we would do differently when we work on future projects.
My next question is heading in a similar way. It's also about, I will just tell you the question. So, because if we talk, for example, about queer cinema or about post-migrant cinema, about these labels, there's, for example, and that's what you already said, not a category of film which is called white cis hetero cinema, for example. And at the end, sometimes I also use, for example, the term queer cinema or post-migrant cinema. And sometimes I ask myself, or I have the feeling that we are operating with categories which are maybe othering our perspective and our art again as the other, the specific. But on the other hand, I ask myself, how can we avoid that, or should we avoid that? What do you think? And dear audience, you're also invited to ask questions before my computer sleeps away again. So don't fall asleep in front of your computers and televisions. So, Maissa.
Sorry, this is a stupid question, but can I go to the toilet. I like.
Yeah, of course. Of course, no pressure. So, okay. So,
yeah, I don't know. I can just speak from very like personal perspective, but when we read the first like articles about FUTUR DREI, it was always presented as FUTUR DREI was the first film being like queer and post-migrant in Germany, but that is so not true. There are so many movies before, and for us it was very important that there is a tradition, or there are always filmmakers who dealing with these issues, and to not make the history invisible. And I think for that it's very important to have like maybe terms, and that you can see, okay, somebody was there before and was fighting for us, and now maybe for us it's a little bit easier to get into the store. For example, we watched a film of Fatima Al-Tayyeb, who did a movie with two black queer women falling in love. I think it was in the 90s, and this film was such a huge inspiration for us when we started talking about FUTUR DREI or this film project. So yeah, I think it can be a useful term for not making film history of marginalized groups invisible, but also there's this problem that some voices are maybe overrepresented in this kind of history, like for example, maybe Turkish male perspectives within German post-migrant cinema, so on.
Yeah, I think in some contexts that they're useful in raising visibility of filmmakers who otherwise don't get that same platform or voice to show their work. But on the other hand, I would love to see, for example, coming from my own perspective, Romani characters in mainstream movies. And it's so little that we actually see Romani characters in British society, where they're not just there to add an element of history, an element of mystery based purely on their ethnicity. What I'd like to see a character in a mainstream movie or on soaps on TV is a character that just happens to be a Romani or a traveller person, and then they have all of these other identities, and the ethnicity is just not the core of what people are focusing on. They just happen to be of that history, that heritage, sorry. And I think the only really good representation in British film of that is actually Peaky Blinders, because it doesn't really show them as like sterling white knight type people. They're just human beings, and they're in the situations that they have. They're advocating for themselves, they're empowered, and they just happen to be Romani. And I mean, there's so little Romani representation in mainstream film. A lot of people don't know is Magneto, actually, from the X-Men, for example. This is a good example of cinema whitewashing and erasing Romani identities, is that he was originally a Sinti in the concentration camps in the early Marvel comics. But I guess that's an example of how mainstream society is kind of erasing and whitewashing people's experiences and identities.
Yeah, and it's so dangerous. Also, what you said earlier, just like by having these stereotyped perspectives, it's like as a viewer, as like someone who's maybe Roma or of color, you think this is what is expected of you, especially like growing up. So you at some point just adjust to the stereotype because you think, okay, if the only person that looks like me is like this, and you know, like especially growing up, like TV is like a window to the world, and like it represents who is part of the society and who isn't. And then you see yourself as part of the society, but always in the stereotyped role, you start to like develop the same behaviors. For instance, like as an Arab, for instance, that like you think you have to be all like, you have to adjust to these like typical like hyper masculine attitudes. And I find that very, very harmful, as you said as well, because what if you don't fit to that narrative? Then you'd feel like you're just not part of this world, and it's even like, yeah, it's dangerous.
I would like to talk about also something which what was already mentioned by you, Raquel. Like when we're talking about these different categories of art and labels,
which are in the form linked to social position of the artist or the filmmaker. We see a special, as you already said, that in Germany, I don't know so much about the situation in England, maybe you can tell us about it, Lisa. We see that there are some very popular categories within the marginalized groups, and then we see that also within these groups there are more privileged or dominant groups and narratives. For example, in Germany there's this very popular category of Turkish-German cinema represented by Fatih Akın and so on, and also the dominance of cis male filmmakers within this group. So I ask myself, why are so few people, for example, talking about so-called Romani German cinema or Romani German queer cinema and so on? Why are there these dominant narratives within the marginalized groups? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's just a reflection of how marginalized Romani people are in British society, particularly, that there isn't more of a dominance around that. Actually, yeah.
So my question would be, how do we deal with these hierarchies within the discriminated groups? Like, for example, if when I'm a cis male Turkish man, or like how should be a strategy of dealing with these hierarchies within the marginalized groups? What do you think?
I think that people in privileged positions should just like I think it. So your question was like in the hierarchies within the communities or in general?
Within the communities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think since it's becoming a topic now, I feel like that especially men should just like maybe. I don't know if I have a good strategy, but like to give away their spots, or not to give away, or collaborate even. Because they are more privileged than, for instance, a woman who's already from a marginalized group, to like really be reflective on that. And sometimes I can imagine it's hard to give away your spot after fighting for so long to get there as a man, because they like for long they're still of color or still marginalized, and then to give the space to someone who's less marginalized. But I think if we continue doing that, then we can all be at some point hopefully equally represented. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely believe in the power of solidarity and alliance with other marginalized groups. In the British context, Romani people are unique, I suppose, in the fact that I have the privilege of being white passing, and I recognize that's a privilege. But at the same time, being Romani isn't a coat that I can take on and off. It's part of my being. It's my ethnicity. But I do recognize that there is a certain amount of privilege that I have with, for example, other Romani people living in different parts of Europe who don't. So I definitely think it's about solidarity and alliance and supporting each other to really build ourselves up beyond the kind of societal lens and expectation that's put in front of us.
I think another very important point for me is sharing your resources, because I think what is very important is to give like workshops or other stuff that people who are interested in film and who are maybe more marginalized than you have access to like the same rooms as you have. And also when you're in contact with funding institutions, share your experience to other groups or people who maybe don't have this access yet, because I think it's so much work to get into these rooms, and once you're there, I think with this privilege there is always comes a lot of responsibility. Maybe to make it easier for other people. That's what we now tried. Once we have funded a feature film, we were we want to share our knowledge, because 5 years ago we were at the same spot and we wouldn't be there where we now are with Berlinale and stuff when there were so many post-migrant and also queer filmmakers who we met at the beginning and who really, really helped us with the funding, because at first it was, what do I have to do? And then, they really helped us with getting there.
We have a question from the audience, from Orkan Özdemir. The question is, visibility of marginalized groups comes with these groups becoming consumers. Would you say that this is a genuine way to create visibility? And could this trend disappear as soon as marginalized groups are pushed back by governments? For example, USA, Poland, Hungary, India, Russia, and so on, so on. Do you understand the question? I don't know if I really do. Is it about like pushing marginalized groups back as consumers, like with censorship on Netflix and so on? If you understood the question, want to answer to it, or maybe Orkan Özdemir could kind of deepen his question or explain it better. Okay, yeah, you will take care of that. Okay, then we wait for the question, but now I would like to my next question. So, yeah, it's linked to something we already talked about. Like we talked about funding and helping each other, and yeah. And my question is about the criticism of intersectional activism, sometimes that under the concept of diversity, marginalized people now want to be integrated into a system and assume, for example, for key positions, or maybe, you know, this narrative of a seat at the table. So that now they want a seat at the table, and some people say, but isn't the system in itself unfair? Do we want to be integrated in an unjust system of hierarchies? Because the film business in Germany, and I assume also in England, is a system of strong hierarchies. So how do we deal with this question, or with the contradictions that result from it for us selves, maybe?
Yeah, I find this, like, I thought about this question a lot. I personally think we have to, for some, like, this is my opinion, it's like we have to, acknowledge the hierarchies that are there, and it's like still a part of capitalism, and that like this is definitely all something that we don't want. But I think in order to break that system, we need to infiltrate it in a way, and like to get in to understand the hierarchies, and by maybe getting into that power position, as like Raquel said, it's like getting other people in the boat, and then from then we can maybe change the whole structure. I don't know if that's too utopian, but it's something I hope is going to happen, and I see it a lot now as well with people that are in good position helping filmmakers out that, for instance, don't have a name or didn't go to film school, because they realize that like in order to succeed, in order to achieve the diversity and intersectionality that we want, we need to like pull everyone up with us. Yeah, I don't know. I struggle with this question a lot, but yeah, that's my.
Yeah, me too. I struggle with it a lot. Raquel.
Yeah, I think it's so difficult, because when I was starting doing film, I always said I want to be part of the mainstream, and I want to make like mainstream cinema, like Titanic or so on, like movies that a lot of people see. But now that I'm getting more and more in the industry, it's so frustrating, because when you get part of the structures, you have the possibility to earn money, but it's always like the same persons who profit from your work. For example, when I now work with a local broadcasting station, and really like 100% of the people who are working there are white, and they getting the most money out of it, like telling our stories maybe, and then hiring us as authors or directors. It becomes really, really frustrating, because I made the experience that the structure behind doesn't really change. And now I think I'm on this point that I really want to lift up my colleagues and people who I know who are doing amazing work and building our own like tables, as you said. But it's also difficult, because you have to pay your rent and so on, and it's always like, I don't know, balancing things out between, okay, I have to get my monthly income, and I want to start something new, working on projects that's not maybe financed yet. And yeah.
Yeah, when we talk about the table, I think wanting a seat at the table, the fact that we have to have a table and people to sit around it is elitist in itself. But it's a difficult question. It's because how do we challenge these power structures that are so long-standing and prevalent in the film industry? And it's not overnight. I think it is, as both of you say, dripping into that, and little by little people can infiltrate that and build themselves up and bring other people with them on that journey. But I suppose the difficulty is for a lot of people is how do you become part of that system and then not become part of the problem or reproduce those same inequalities that exist? And it's a very fine line, and it's very difficult, and I see this happen sometimes a lot. So it is a broad question, I guess, but they're just my thoughts.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that as well, because like getting like to, I feel like it's so like even to get to that table. I mean, like structurally, I feel like it starts in 4th grade to even get anywhere without actually having the help of your community, without like, for instance, not being able to. I mean, how many of us have been recommended to go to Hauptschule, which is like the lowest high school degree, like high school recommendation. And then from then to even do your high school diploma, and then who gets into the film schools, and the people that get into the film schools, it's really well represented in German TV. It's mainly white and male, and then if someone just has that space at the table and really gets everyone in, that's No, I mean I agree, but just like it's as you said, it's like it's so structural that like. Yeah, it just needs, the whole system needs to be broken and then built again, but I guess that's not going to happen for now. But
yeah, but I mean, you all also work in kind of structures which are not linked to institutions. I mean, in collectives or as educators, do you have the feeling that in these structures that are there an alternative to the institutions and to the structures in the institution? What possibilities do you have, or how is the work in these alternative structures?
I think there is an opportunity in alternative structures, maybe NGOs or collectives, to bring new perspectives, but then the ultimate aim in a way is to bring those perspectives to wider society, for them to acknowledge and respect the presence of marginalized voices. So it's a difficult one.
I'm also curious about, I mean, we already talked about our responsibility as filmmakers or as journalists also, and if we're talking about political actions or being a political artist or a political person or political in every sense, what can art or film actually, we already talked about it a little bit, but I would like to deepen this question. What can art film actually achieve in the end, especially for multiple marginalized people, for example, for refugees, for people who are not here on the stage, and for like what can it achieve it at the end, really? Like in terms also of rights, protection, social status, political participation, and so on and so on.
Well, I think when it's done well, it can have really deep, long-lasting impacts on the people, in terms of all those things that you've just talked about. And I think that's the power of film, is that it can really infiltrate people's perspectives, not only to the general audience, but also have a political impact, politicians, law change, legislation. So I think when done well, it can actually impact on people's everyday lived experiences. But on the other hand, when it's done poorly, it can have a really negative, long-lasting impact on people. And we see this quite a lot in British television with documentaries that are on TV a lot that depict Romani life or traveller life. And what we see and we dread after a documentary comes on, because what we do see is a rise in hate crime and attacks or hate speech rhetoric coming from politicians or elected officials. So it really does influence every aspect of reality in life. As you said, film and TV evades everything. Everybody in the main has got a TV in their living room, and we can't underestimate the power and the subconscious influence that has on people's beliefs and attitudes towards minority people in society.
Yeah, and as you said, it has like it literally has an effect on like the way you think. It has an effect on like everyday life, especially also when I did my research about that. Is that film, like the fictional film and TV series, have even like people like heavy TV viewers like see these kind of formats, fictional formats, as informative formats, so that they would link it to reality. And it's so easily like it's like the line between reality and fiction is so thin, and that's so, I mean, that's why I also think, sorry, I'm so that's why I think it is very important, and it's really crucial, especially growing up. Like by growing up and not having, like not seeing yourself, also has long-lasting effects on you. You know, you already what was the word? Minderheitskomplexe. You feel inferior. Yeah, minority. Like you feel inferior. You feel like you will never have a seat at the table, and also the way it influences politics, because if we always, like what happened with Germany, like Roma and Sinti people, for instance, they're so stereotyped. Same with Arabs and Turks and other kind of minority groups, and this is what leads to hate, because people will always relate to these characters on film, or even like having something like Tatort. People watch that every Sunday. And by like seeing these characters on repeat, they become like part of your family. Like when you watch a show like Lindenstraße every day, like these people, it's almost like you would know them. And if there would be more dimensional characters of minorities, people, especially white people, like 70-year-old Irmgard could actually like create a liking on these people, see them as human, like if they just are humanized on TV and film. But unfortunately, it's not the case really, or like really rarely. And
yeah, absolutely. In terms of talking about young people and the impact on them, I think it sends a message about our capabilities and what we can achieve in society as human beings. But also with young people, it puts a limit on their aspirations for themselves and what they deserve and what they can achieve. And this is so harmful for a young person's development and how they view themselves, but more importantly, how they feel about themselves.
Yeah, I think for me the power of images is also that they can create a utopian space. And in our collective we talked lately a lot about sci-fi and also fantasy films, because there maybe you have more the freedom to create a space that you wish you would live in. And I think that is what makes film for me so special, that you also can build an alternative reality. And what you just said, that there are visions of yourself and multiple images of yourself that are portraying people as complex as they are, and not just the one image as the criminal, and so on.
Yeah, just on that point, sorry, I just think that's why representation is so important in mainstream film and TV, because it's so important for you to be able to see somebody that looks like you, has the same culture as you, because that drives you. We need positive, I don't like the word, but positive role models for young people to see that there is people like them and they do exist.
And I think even internally with your own community as well, watching, for instance, as a queer Muslim or whatever, it's like watching a show with your family on repeat, and they see a character who's maybe their own child, would maybe even tolerate, tolerate or be open to that idea, because even they also get influenced by by film and TV. So even in that aspect, I think it's really important to because TV and film could start conversation within the family or within the community as well, if it's done well. And
was that also part of your dissertation, as a topic? Okay. yeah, that's really, really very interesting. And I would ask you again, Lisa, because you already mentioned it, like the impact on young people. And I mean, you're chair of ACERT, and also it's Kishori Dukpa, which is also a filmmaking project, like imploring the impact of anti-Gypsyism on youth mental health through a series of film and so on. So could you maybe sum up your experiences, or how you how your form of resistance with these young people are against this harmful narratives which they see?
Yeah, we created the project because we wanted to present an alternative narrative to the dominant one that existed. And it was focused around youth mental health, but we didn't want to position it as mental health as a problem within the community, because the community has these issues. We wanted to present it as the impact of wider society and the impact of anti-Gypsyism on young people and how they perceive themselves, how they feel about themselves. And it talked about how, for example, one film highlighted how the lack of Romani and traveller history and culture in school curriculums impacted on young people's feeling about themselves, their sense of belonging. And I think there is something really powerful in a school situation, but then obviously in film and TV, is this power in silence. And the silence of representation of different minorities or groups of people speaks louder than the presence in some ways, because this silence makes young people feel like there's something wrong with them, and that's why there's no representation. So I do think there is this power in this silence in a negative way. But the project that we ran lasted over a year, and we worked in collaboration with young people who their stories, their real life stories, inform the script, and they worked on those and we co-produced them, and young people were on set and some chose to act in them. And this was all to put the power back into the young people's hands, because we have so much narrative about what people think are the issues that our community experiences, but we have so little from actually the voice of the community and the young people themselves speaking up. And it's just all about space. And I think this transcends across every single group, is that we just need people to allow us space to tell our own stories and speak for ourselves. And I think it is as simple as that. It's the space and people to take a step back and let those narratives come through, because when we do have the opportunity, it's clear that they're fresh and they're bold new narratives that are brought to screen from a different perspective that can be beneficial. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you as well, and like to just give that space. And I just thought about this example that I also had in my thesis, was that, for instance, back in the days, like in the 80s, 70s, there was like 60s, 70s, 80s, was so rare to see like queer couples on television. And then there was like the first kiss on like a family TV series, which was called Days of Our Lives. And I think it was like 1991. And it was the first time where there was like a queer character who was just a more dimensional character, someone which every family was watching that show, and it was someone who didn't have like the narrative of like the AIDS epidemic or whatever. It was like just like a more dimensional character. And after that show aired, the showrunner received so many letters from all over the world, where people really said stuff like, yeah, I never knew that what I'm feeling is normal, and I was about to kill myself, or like I felt like this is not, like, people like us don't exist, especially if you come from small towns where you never ever see that representation. And I thought that was like such a beautiful example how powerful and life-saving also representation can be. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we already talked about the future, or young people, who are the future of our societies, and that would be my next question. Maybe, what must follow? Like, if we talk about intersectionality as a tool of analysis, as a form of to frame discrimination structures and so on, what must follow to the analysis of intersectional structures, and also maybe what must follow to our to another form of representation. What is our responsibility as persons who have an audience? I mean, we're sitting here and people are listening to us, hopefully. What must follow?
I think that it's especially important that something changes politically and that we exert the pressure on like local funding and broadcasting stations. For example, the way that quality is measured in Germany is that I think 10,000 households in Germany, they're measuring the quality of what they are watching, but the main earner has to be German and the main earner of this household, and in 90% these are white men. So actually quality in Germany is measured by white men, and that is why very often local broadcasting stations say, but this is not all right, we have to have a white character in it. For example, I've just heard that for Blocks, the series, which is very well known, in the first place there wasn't a white character in it, but then maybe
the whole team is
they
white.
Thought, okay, we have to have something that most people can identify with and so on. So I really think we have to change the structure in which quality is measured, but also how the local broadcasting stations, like how their stuff look like actually, and that they diversify themselves, but also the access to funding, because I think the access to funding in Germany is so hard and requires a lot of barriers, and also that the film schools really change and be more accessible from people from different marginalized groups, because I think the film schools is the first way where you get no access to the film world. So I think we really have to stand together and show solidarity, but also pressure politics that they change something structurally.
But the white character in 4 Blocks, he died in the first season, no? I don't want to spoiler anything.
I'm not sure about this information, but somebody, I don't know, we just talked about
I'm sorry.
But I think maybe, not specify on this example, but I think it's very often that broadcasting stations say we need this one male white character for our audience, who's mostly white men.
70 years old Irmgard.
Yeah, exactly. So Irmgard can relate. I mean, even the showrunner of 4 Blocks is white, and just because you walk down Sonnenallee once doesn't mean you can tell these stories. And also I personally really am angry about that we have so many shows about the mafia, because there's more to Arab people as well. And I wouldn't mind if there was more diversity in other shows, if we had other shows where there was a more dimensional representation of them, it would be cool, we can have mafia series. But if it's only that, no wonder why Irmgard would switch the street every time an Arab person would pass by, because they created so much fear towards these people.
Yeah, Lisa.
In terms of from a Romani perspective, in British film and TV, the biggest challenge that we first have is getting broadcasters and getting TV production companies and funders to recognise that Romani travellers are here, that we are a recognised ethnic group in society, and we've got a battle in itself. So the first battle is first getting them to see the relevance and importance of including us in creative processes and films or soaps about us. So that's the first challenge in itself. And I think the lack of representation in the media, the lack of representation represents an opportunity. But the first battle is getting broadcasters and TV production companies to see that opportunity and what we can bring to the table and offer.
I have a question to you, because the BBC has this diversity strategy. Do you think it works, or like, do you think in general it works because they have this like rule about that, like so and so many people from different backgrounds have to be part of the production, have to be part of casting? But it doesn't. Yeah,
I think the issue from my perspective is that often we talk about black and ethnic minority community. So BAME is this terminology that's bandied about a lot. But unfortunately, there's not really often any recognition that Romani travellers exist within that BAME definition. So it's almost like you're having to fight for recognition within that BAME circle before you even think about moving on to, you know, something more mainstream. So although that exists, there's still a struggle from our community for people who are running those courses and programs to recognise that we are a community that they should be reaching out to as well, I think.
Thank you so much. And we have this one question from the audience, which we skipped a couple of minutes ago, but now I want to repeat. It's now in German, and I try to translate it somehow. I mean, the question was that, for example, if we watch Netflix, we have a lot of very good productions dealing with Black experiences or made by Black filmmakers, Black producers, and so on and so on. I think the question is that are these groups now represented because they are also very important as consumers of Netflix? Is, for example, Netflix that diverse because Netflix needs that diverse groups of consumers? And is this kind of participation which is good maybe in a political way? Is it good for all, or is it kind of a false participation? And do you understand the question now somehow? Did I make it? Yeah, because I think, the point in it is the question ends with, like, if we have, I don't know, governments which are more marginalized groups and oppressing them, and maybe sometimes, like in a couple of years, they are not anymore important as consumers, as groups of consumers. Maybe Netflix will turn again into, I don't know, white, cis, male-dominated platform. And is that a good thing, like the situation now? Are we happy with it, or should it be different?
I'm also very conflicted with that, because it's, again, like we've been tokenized for them, for their benefit, and also because it's a trend right now. But it's so easy to just throw that token away at some point, and that's what I'm terrified of as well. It's like if we're not, as the question, by the way, was really good. If we are not important anymore, not beneficial, what happens then?
Could you maybe, is it okay for you if you could explain the word tokenize? What does that mean for like the adult audience?
Yeah, a token, I'm not sure if I'm explaining it well, but it's if someone uses you for like the diversity trope. For instance, like a token in an office, and there's like one person of color, and there will be like, oh, we hired a person of color, we are so diverse, kind of like being used. Yeah, like being used, I mean, sometimes I'm like, yeah, tokenize me, please, like I need money. But then, it's like, you're dehumanized in a way, because then they only see you for this.
And I think a lot of filmmakers want to be respected for their skill and what they can bring to the table as a human being in their creative practice, rather than just being brought to the table for this tokenistic or diversity standards that we want to conform to. I think I have really noticed a change on Netflix recently in the amount of representation of Black film directors. For example, Ava DuVernay, she's one of my favourite documentary film directors. And I think this is a good thing. But I also think that, maybe when it becomes less trendy to support the movement, that we will then see a resurface of more white, male-dominated narratives on screen.
Do you have another question from the audience? No? Audience, what is happening with you? We need your questions. No, yeah, we need your questions, but I'm kind of out of questions now. Do you have any questions?
Actually, I have one.
Yeah.
What do you guys think about quota? Because again, I feel like sometimes it could be difficult, like be a quota for like this diversity strategy, for instance. Because I feel like there's so many conflicted opinions about that too, and I also feel conflicted about it because at the same time it's great to have this rule to hire us, but then as you said, like being just hired because you are of color and not because of your skills. And I wanted to ask, what's your opinion about it?
I think, it's necessary because otherwise nothing will change. I think we were waiting for too long, especially within the public broadcasting stations, because they were working there for, 20 years or something. There was a statistics that within ZDF, most people worked there on the average of 20 years already or something. And they're really like getting old, and there are only like white cis male persons in there mostly. Yeah. And I think, I'm also conflicted with it, but I think if there would be a law or a rule, maybe it's easier. Okay, now the conversation just started, you have to do the quota, and then we can talk about it further, what we want to change as well.
Now we have a question from the audience. Or, to be honest, it's a question from Jana Turan from the festival team. But it's a very important and very good question. The question is, can you tell us about your next projects? So how will you include intersectional perspectives in them, as you already do now? But how you will include them in the future? Yeah.
So I'll go first. So a project that I'm in early stages development of now is a documentary showing the experience of a Romani family in the English and Welsh context. And I hope that it can have some type of political significance or impact, because at the moment we have a piece of legislation coming out that will make a nomadic way of life, will criminalise nomadic existence. So it will change the culture massively. And my aim for this is to map places and pieces of land that are of historical significance and value to our community, but these are pieces of land that people could just walk by and not realise that there is this deep-rooted connection with Romani people in these lands. And I hope that it can raise the profile of Romani and traveller history in a British context. Especially with the legislation that's being pushed fast. So in terms of intersectional identities and bringing different voices into that, I hope I can include a range of different people's experiences.
About you? My microphone. What are your next projects, if you want to tell about it? It's like
Currently, I'm working on a youth series called Druck. It's the German scum, but for like the next or future projects, I'm working on a film about my mother and her childhood, and actually it's a fantasy film where she meets her father in the presence of a dragon and gets haunted by a spectral past or something. Yeah, and I really. Because I've never wrote a whole script, so I really want to focus on like script writing and starting maybe with a story from my own biography.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sorry, does your mother know about the project? And
she knows.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, Maissa.
Yeah, I'm also working on like my first like long feature script, and it's also about not my mother only, but it's about. It's based on my mother. I can't tell her it's her, but like it's about 4 women. It's a mafia comedy film, and it would be about 4 women that meet at the German, like immigrant women that meet at the Deutschkurs, German class, and it's about like how. So at some point they get involved into the mafia because of a something bad happened. I can't tell everything yet, but yeah, so they get involved into the mafia, and for the whole time, like I know it's funny that I said like I don't want to see any mafia series anymore, but it's about like 4 strong women from different backgrounds, and it's how they have to help the mafia because because something bad happened, so they have to do it, and then they get so undermined by like the police and the whole society because no one expects them to be like the masterminds behind everything, because they like these like innocent young women that barely speak German, and like it's more about like how our mothers got undermined so much without understanding how strong they were, and it's kind of like an homage to all the immigrant mothers that came here with like maybe a husband that was abusive as well, because most of the time men that get women from other countries, they feel like they have the power over them because she wouldn't know anyone else except him, and so yeah, it's kind of about that. I mean, yeah, she kills her husband.
Oh my God, I need to see these movies.
I need to. I wish to get money would be so easy.
Please give her the money for a
Please.
movie. A woman killing her husband. Yeah, Jana, she's already cheering there. And we have another question from Moshtari Hilal, artist and my dear friend. She's watching us on YouTube, and she's asking, do you think there needs to be something like the inclusion rider in Hollywood, also in Germany? Or is there something similar in the making? I wonder if we need more data to claim funding and space. That's the question.
Yeah, actually, there is a new, like, I don't know, data, statistics from Crew United, where they asked a lot of people about their experience within German production contexts with discrimination, and I think this study is also a bit controversial, but I think it's also useful to have the data to push your agenda. But I think it's currently in the making. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really happy to hear that, because when I was doing research in 2016, I could not find any article, any statistic about how many writers of color we have, how many actors of color we have. Literally nothing. Like I had to literally look for American data and then assume what it would be like here based on what I'm seeing on TV. And I'm super happy there's something in the making, because that's where it should start.
Yeah, but the bad thing is that you have to be registered on Crew United, and I think a lot of filmmakers, for example myself, weren't registered before the study, and I tried to, and it was very, very difficult, because you have to show some projects to them that get funded and blah blah, and so I think there are a lot of especially BIPOC filmmakers who aren't registered there, and their experience is maybe not shown in this data now, but this experience is so important. So I think it's good that they started with Crew United, because it is a tool for German filmmakers, but it should be like more inclusive to everybody who's not registered at a certain platform and so on. But I think it's a really good start, and I really want to push this study, actually.
Is there a similar thing in the UK, like data, funding and space of this kind of data statistics?
Well, there's an issue not just in film, but across the board, I suppose, in that there is a lack of data on the population of Romani people, and we have a census, but that only showed a very small population of people, because there is a fear for disclosing your ethnicity and saying who you are. So people will often not be open about their ethnicity until they're in a position where they feel it's not going to impact on their professional practice or impact on them getting roles, I think. So it's a difficult one. But there isn't, as exists, any current information about Romani travelers in film that I'm aware of. But maybe that's a project in itself, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, because I realized when I was doing my research, it was always Black, brown, or like POC, Hispanic, and barely Roma, Sinti was never mentioned as like a percentage, because it would be like Hispanic, Black, Asian, like these like 3 categories, the typical one, and then others, and which is already like othering another minority group. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the levels of discrimination stop people from being more vocal until they're in a position where they feel they can.
We can't. My last question, or the last question was from the audience, is I mean, we talked about now like an hour and a half, but maybe to sum up, what is your vision or utopia of an intersectional justice in cinema, or of a film business which is thinking in an intersectional way? So what is your utopia, your vision? Can take a minute to think about it. I mean, that's a big question.
Abolish institutions. I feel like if we wouldn't have these institutions that are gatekeepers, it would be so much easier to have like a pool of like to have an open space where you can pitch ideas, or where you can like apply for funding without like showing at which school you were, what kind of like things you've already done. Film schools, really, like I think like there's so much respect for what I mean. Film schools are great, but like there's so much how do you say it, like so much Wert, is so much worth in film schools that like people it's ask you from which school you studied at to give you funding, instead of asking about your creativity or asking about your work, what you've done. But it's always like so dependent on like which film school you've been to, and I think this is it just needs to stop. And also so much actually institutions.
I mean, also institutions come directly to the film schools and kind of just pick their favorite young filmmakers, and they don't need to look at other structures or collectives that just go to the film schools and pick them. Yeah, definitely. So, do you have an
overall an override of the complete system, where everybody's respected as human beings.
Yeah, definitely. And we have another question from the audience. Now the audience woke up. So this is really the last question, because our panel discussion is coming to an end. The question by Raphael Jones is: with the state of the world right now, do you believe film festivals have the same potency as before in the past? And if not, what can young filmmakers do without the proper platform to find funding? So it's a question about film festivals in general, which is really important this year.
I think the way that film festivals operate from this year forward is going to be completely different. I think they'll be operating in more like hybrid forms, so they'll have in-person screenings, but then I don't think we're ever going to lose this online aspect now within film festivals, because I think festivals have realized how more accessible in a way films are being made. But then of course it's not as nice for somebody if you presenting a film and it's not in the cinema, you don't get that same feedback or feeling from the audience about how it went, so it's more difficult to kind of gauge how it's being received. But undoubtedly I think this year is really going to change the way that film festivals work moving forward forever.
Just a comment. I kind of wish like they would also stop asking for so much money to to send your films to festival. Again, access. Like not everyone can afford to pay 200 euros to send in their film, no matter how good it is.
Yeah, of course. Now I come to an end of our panel discussion, which was so interesting and about so different and important topics and questions. And do you have a kind of closing comments, or are you now just exhausted, or is there anything you want to tell the world? Then it's now your possibility. And
I'd just like to say to our audience, thank you very much for your questions, and I've really enjoyed this panel discussion.
Cool. I enjoyed it very, very much. Yeah. Thank you so much, Lisa Smith, Maissa Lihedheb, Raquel Kishori Dukpa, and it was really a pleasure to speak to you. And yeah, do you want to?
No, I just wanted to say and thank you for the great moderation.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so
thank
much.
You so much. Yeah, I mean, I hope that it was a real pleasure to speak to you, and I hope the discussion about intersectionality in film and TV and in general doesn't end here. And I'd like to thank again Dr. Emilia Roig. And I want to thank especially Academia, the Festival for Romani Film, for your amazing and important work. And thank you, Jana and Turan, and the whole team here in the SO36. Yeah, kisses back. And you were so great. And yeah, dear audience, the festival, of course, doesn't end here. You have the possibility to watch a bunch of fucking great films and programs until tomorrow evening. And yeah, just you need your registration online, and everything is online. Films are online, we are online. And yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, audience. Thank you, everybody, dear viewers. Thank you, take care, and goodbye.